All right. Okay, we'll get rolling here. Thanks, anybody that's joined us now or later. We're going to kind of follow our typical format. We're going to turn it over to Greg Bonebrake, our application dev manager, for what's new, and then get into the meat of this masterclass, which is system best practices, led by Mohit Vatsa, our technical support manager at Zoom Assist. Mohit's got 10 years as an IT manager, hosting Rover in Linux and Windows, 10 years in a manufacturing environment using Rover, and then we've got some others that are bringing something like over 20, 30 years combined experience in the various areas. So hoping that this can be informative. And with that, let's turn it over to Greg.
Thank you, Bill. Let me share my screen here. So the last couple master classes, we've given a quick preview of some of our upcoming inventory inquiry and parts management functionality. I just wanted to touch on that again. We've made some progress here. The plan is for this to go out in the next Rover web release, which should happen this week. So this functionality that you see here should be available very shortly. So from the inventory module, which is this little package here, you have the ability to view purchase orders and make receipts against them. You also now have the ability to look up and view parts. So you get a listing of the parts. You can also do a search. So you can choose an item from the list. When you click on an item, it opens up in a new tab. And then you now have the ability to view and edit details that would normally show up in parts.e. And you can also view inventory inquiry information, including details of commitments, shortages, whole host of details, including usage history with charts. You can expand that and see the underlying detail behind the chart. But let me kind of dive in here. So in parts, we have material control details, customer supplier details, and all of that is editable if you have the correct permissions based on the user you're logged in as. One other item, we've made some distinctions in bins and inventory inquiry. So bins are now either reference bins, or in the case that there is a control bin, you have additional details there. In the web, it's just a little easier to show those distinctions in UI. So we have some details there. One other thing, let me jump over to point of sale to kind of show some new functionality. We're starting to add the notion of linking between sections of the product. So now I'm in point of sale here, and if I go in to start creating an order and adding items to the cart, I can click on the inventory detail link within the parts listing, and now there's a part details button, which will pop open a new tab and take you right to the parts detail for the item that you clicked on, and it's going to cause me problems. We're working one little bug where it doesn't set the visibility of that properly, but there we were just in point of sale, clicked on a part, clicked on the part detail, popped open a window and went to that part. So gives a quick way to jump over and see all the details of the part and the inventory for that item while you're in point of sale. So that's exciting. Again, that should be going out this week. And then the next thing I'm going to show is something we've added to our accounting module. This was initially being driven for a non-Rover implementation, but we do intend to support this on Rover systems as well. So this is our accounting module. You have payables, receivables, GL. Clicking the cards brings up detail for those particular sections. Now we've added the ability to selectively add an orders card, which then shows orders that are on credit hold. There's some flexibility in what the logic is that makes that selection. So then you get a listing of the orders that are on hold, and you can click into those, which will then bring up detail for that order, where you can see both the line item detail of the order, some basic customer details, and then you can also view the accounts receivable details for that customer, as well as recent payments that have been made. The idea here is to give a clerk the ability to review that order and the customer that it's related to, and make a determination of whether that order can be released from credit hold. If they decide that it can be, we've added this release button here. and it can have variable reasons for why they're deciding to release it, which will then be updated to the order. So once the reason is selected and click release, when I click this, it's not going to actually work against the system again. This is being implemented for a non-Rover system at the moment. So that would update that sales order, changing the status, making it no longer on hold, and then further actions could be taken from there. All
Very
right,
cool.
I think that's what we have to demo today. Again, these will both be going out here shortly in the next release.
All right.
I'll hand it back to you, Bill.
All right. Yeah, thanks a lot, Greg. And yeah, just as always, to everybody, thanks for joining us. And feel free to introduce any questions in the chat as we go. Without further ado, turn it over to Mohit and the team.
Perfect. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Greg. So I guess first thing would be if everyone can see my screen.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Thanks for confirming. So the reason why we're discussing this, right? Why is this an important subject? The reason for this is to ensure system uptime, performance, security, alignment with disaster recovery, and also protection of data. System uptime is the #1 goal. We all understand just how crucial ERPs are for the businesses in order to function in a day-to-day format. And so some of the things that we'll be going over is just system requirements, monitoring and alerting on the system side, as well as built in to Rover, backups and the importance of them, updates, not only of the operating system, but as well as the application itself, archiving, and we'll be doing a demo of all of these things. So I promise it's not going to be a static PowerPoint. The entire time we will be getting into some of the functionality within Rover ERP itself. And then we'll close it off with a Q&A.
Okay, great.
So system requirements. So a lot of people may not know this, but we do have documentation. So I've included a link here, and you can access this using docs.zoomassist.com. And we do publish our system requirements as far as supported operating systems, minimum specifications that are required to run Rover ERP, as well as required software that goes along with the package. And so one of the things that you may notice here is we do include a few pieces of software such as Screen Connect and Bitwise. And so the reason we include that is you may have been contacted by someone from our implementations team on switching over to these softwares in order to support your on-premise system. And the reason for that is it makes it a lot easier for our team to be able to support the product, support any issues that you may have. It also removes the requirement for our engineers needing VPN access. It is still protected by multi-factor authentication. It's limited to select personnel on the support and implementations team that would need access. And we still require credentials on your side to get in. So we don't have a direct, just a direct path to get in. There are still security buffers in place. For setting up the system itself for on-premise as well as in SaaS, we recommend solid-state drives for the QM folder. So this is the production folder where Rover will live. We do recommend a separate drive for attachments and images. And the reason for that is attachments and images, that's something that's ever growing and you don't want to risk your production folder from running out of space, right? You want to keep that separate. And the attachment and images folder, it doesn't have to be a solid state drive. It can just be a normal drive. With SaaS, during the discovery process, we do have our implementations team go through a few cycles with the business, such as beginning of the month, mid-month, and end of month, to assess that the current specifications are in place for the business requirements. Throughout that, if disk space or the virtual machine need to be upgraded, they can seamlessly be upgraded with just a simple reboot without having dependence on physical hardware in order for the upgrade to take place. And for a verification of your current specifications, if you're on premise, please reach out and we can provide feedback. Not every system is the same. You may have a 100-user system where 75% of the users are terminals that are logging in and just clocking in, clocking out, start job, end job. And you may have another 100-user system, which is mostly office users that are creating purchase orders, sales orders. So the requirements for each of those would be drastically different. The next topic we'll be going over is monitoring and alerts. So if your Rover instance is being hosted in our SaaS environment, we do have engineers that are continuously monitoring disk space, CPU usage, memory, networking, as well as downtime and uptime. So we do use the QM service as a way to get alerts if the server has been rebooted, it's gone through updates, there's no communication, the service has stalled. So we do have engineers that react to these alerts in real time. There's also built-in monitoring in Rover that Kathy will be demoing. And this is accessible through monitor.control. And with this monitoring, you can get alerts for any services within Rover, the Windows M3 service, any memory usage alerts, replication, and you can set up users on your side to receive email alerts or alerts within the Rover application itself. A few examples of that is if you have a nightly process that runs every night that generates, MRP or specific batches of data that gets rendered at night. And if it's stuck, it just didn't run, you can be alerted before you have users reach out to you and letting you know that there's a problem. Also the backups, if there's a failure with the backups or it's stalled, just hasn't run, same thing. You can also get alerts for replication. If you're using replication within Rover and there's an issue or the queue has built up to a point where it can't process it, you can receive alerts. The next thing that we'll be going over is backups, the importance of backups, how it's controlled within Rover itself. And this is, again, something that Kathy will be demoing live within the application. So the importance of backups. In 2024, 59% of businesses were affected by ransomware. And the average downtime was 24 days. The average ransom was 2.7 million. Now, obviously, this is including, larger businesses, so it skews the numbers a bit. But backups are not only important for ransomware, it's also important for hardware failure, natural disasters, such as fires or floods. And so within Rover, the backup process can be controlled through backup.control. This is accessible through service.control. And through backup.control, you can configure which data accounts get backed up, the frequency, the time, and where those backups live. If you want them to be copied to a different area of the network, or if you want them to be copied over using FTP, that can all be done through backup.control. We also have a few folders that everyone probably recognizes. And so just a quick explanation, QM Live, this is the production Rover ERP folder. QM Backup is a backup of the QM Live folder. And QM Archive takes the QM Backup folder, zips it up, and presents it for you to take, offsite, or you can back it up to the cloud in many different areas. With SaaS, the backups are handled and managed for you. So we do have a default 7-day, 2-week, 3-month policy for backups. We can restore files at a file level or the VM itself. And all backups are kept in a separate vault. So if there's anything that would come out of this slide, it would be the zipped files that are kept in the QM archive folder. That's the most important file that you should be backing up. And that file should always be taken offsite. In case of ransomware or a natural disaster, as long as we have that file, we can get your system up and running. If you're on premise and you've been hit with ransomware and you want to move to the cloud, as long as we have that zipped file, we can get you running, the same day.
Yeah, just a quick note there, and we have, right, Mohit? This is something that's come up in the real world, real life experience last year or so, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we've experienced this through support within the past year, actually at a higher frequency in the last year. So it's in alignment with some of the data that we're seeing out there in the wild with just ransomware picking up in frequency. And we've had a few cases where we've had some customers on premise that have great backup policies, and they're able to get us the zipped files. And in a lot of cases, we've gotten them up and running in the cloud the same day. And so their users are able to connect, perform business functions. And there's been a few other cases where if you don't have a clean backup, it can take anywhere from a few days to a week to 2 weeks to get up and running because you're dependent on restoring that VM or server. And you also have to validate the integrity of the data. You don't want to spread ransom data from one server to another. And so it's just in today's environment and world, it's just becoming more and more important. The next thing we'll be going over is updates. So of course, for security, you always want to have the latest operating system security updates, whether you're on Linux or Windows. If you're on SaaS, this is being handled for you. If you're on premise and you're performing server updates, best practice there would be to validate that updates haven't broken anything in a non-production environment first before you deployed it to production. And so not only the operating system level, but within the application itself. So there's always a lot of confusion on, what is ACE and what is M3. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard, hey, you need an ACE upgrade in order to get this feature, or you're going to require an M3 upgrade. And so what is the difference between that? So you can see we have a screenshot in the top right, and you can get this information from within your application by navigating to help and about. So a client version, that's the actual software of the application that you're running, right? That you've installed in Windows or wherever you're running the application. And that's something that you can upgrade yourself. You have control over that. I've included a link to where you can find the latest client or the latest .NET release. And we always publish this after releasing a new version with the release notes, so you can see what bug fixes have been implemented, what feature enhancements have been implemented. And so that's the first item that you see there, ACE version. So that's the core application that is including system-wide utilities such as security.control, alerts, web services, attachment.control. And then there's M3. So M3, those are the day-to-day programs such as SO.E, PO.E, ship.E, all the different programs that your users are using on a daily basis. And so the importance of keeping these up to date is to always have the latest features, bug fixes, security updates, new releases that our dev team is working on. And so if you'd like any more information on this, or if you'd like to get an upgrade going, please reach out to help@zoomassist.com so that we can talk further. The next thing for system best practices, which Kathy and Andrew will be going over more and demoing, is just archiving and purging of data. So there's two ways to go about this. So you can purge data that is no longer required. If you don't need access to it and you don't mind it not being an historical account, you can purge it completely. You can also archive data for historical purposes before it's purged. And in those cases, data is moved to a history account before being deleted from the live account itself. And the benefits of this include improved performance, speed, data management. Your users are only seeing data that's relevant to them for the business. And this is a feature that has been around in older versions of Rover, but it was a manual process that was mostly done by super users or engineers assisting with the process. And so the newer versions of Rover, we've made this automated, and we now include a few programs like archive.control and archive.p1. So it gives the system admins the power to automate the archiving seamlessly without having to be involved in the process. And if you'd like more details on that, again, please reach out to help@zoomassist.com. This is something that Kathy is going to be demoing with Andrew. And so next I'll hand it off to Kathy. She's going to be demoing a few functions that we just talked about: backup.control, system.d, monitoring, as well as archiving.
Hi there.
Great.
So I'm going to, sorry,
Go
do
ahead,
you have a
Kathy.
question,
Sorry.
Bill?
No, I was just going to call a quick attention. Just there's a little bit of chat going on. Greg, thanks for answering that about the .NET. And then just so everybody knows, Andrew had put in a link to the client setup where you can always grab the latest client, so you can keep that up to date as well. So sorry, go ahead, Kathy, from there.
Okay. Okay, so can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be touching on a number of commands that Mohat has referenced in his talk. And thank you, Mohit. I think you basically gave my speech for me. So the first thing I want to talk about is service.control, which you will find in the ACE utilities portion or module. And as Mohit mentioned, this is where you are going to access the services, including the backup surface. So most of you are probably somewhat familiar with this screen already. And this basically is the screen, as I just said, that allows you to manage your services. You can set up new services to execute specific jobs. Typically, you all will have a nightly service that runs each evening. And one of the standard services that is delivered with the system is the backup. And I don't know if you're familiar with these three fields at the top of the screen, but they are a way for you to filter which items will appear. So if I want to limit the services that are running in the ACE account, I can set this field to ACE. If I only want to see which services are currently started, I can enter started, and then it narrows down the list for me. So the service that we've been talking about right now is the backup service. And if I want to drill down on it, I click on Properties button, I highlight the service, and then I can click on the Properties button. I can also right mouse click and basically get the same options that I have up above. And this opens up another screen called serviceprop.e, which we will talk about in just a minute. And if I go to more settings, it opens up the backup.control, which Mohit included a screenshot in his presentation. And you can have multiple backups defined if required. So for example, you could have one backup that runs daily that backs up your primary data and software accounts, and maybe a second backup that runs weekly or monthly to back up your history accounts or all accounts on the system. If you want, you can set up the ability to, using FTP, to move the backup to a different location on your network. And Mohit mentioned archiving the backups. That's controlled by this field here, the max history field. So for this particular system, we are keeping 2 archived copies of the backup. You can change that number, change it to a number that makes sense for your company. The one thing you do want to remember is that you don't want to exceed the amount of available space you have on the drive where these backups are saved. So you don't want to go crazy and maybe put, 9,000 into that field. But then you just choose how often you want the backup to run and what time it should run every day. And I apologize. This field is where you define the path where the backup will be written out to. And this is in Mohit's presentation, he referenced these paths. This is where they are actually entered. So in this case, we are creating a backup on the E drive in a folder called QM Backup, and the archives are being stored in a separate folder called QM Archive, also on the E drive. And they do not have to be on the same server. So one thing I do just want to mention here is that for customers that are hosting their own servers, please make sure you do have enough space on the drive where these files are saved. And please remember to take copies of the backups offsite. in case, as Mohit mentioned, of a disaster, a fire, ransomware, etc. And if you have an IT company that handles this function for you, please confirm with them that this is being done and it is being done daily. Now, the monitoring service that Mohit was mentioning is this service, which is also part of our ACE account. So if I go to properties, and again, we get this screen here and more settings, you can set this up so that certain users are notified if a problem is detected with the service or the system, it's not responding for whatever reason. So at a minimum, I would always select the services option and the M3 services option. And in this case, Mohit is going to receive an alert if a problem is detected with either of these functions. So one thing you want to make sure of is that in security.e or E2, an email address has been entered for that user. If none has been entered, they will not receive an email. Oops, sorry, wrong screen. And these are the other services that or features that Mohit was referring to, that the user could be notified if there was a problem, memory usage, replication, and the update queue. And whether or not you select these options depends on whether or not you're using replication, etc. But one of the more common alerts, so the way it works is if a problem is detected, you will receive, the user who is entered here will receive an email. And one of the more common emails that they will receive is that a service is not responding. And that's where we go back to this screen, serviceprop.e. There's a field in here called alert minutes. So if we look at one of the services, and I apologize, I should do this differently. We don't have it. Okay, I apologize. If we have a service like a nightly service that is set to execute a series of jobs, like your shipment posting process, your receipt posting process, etc., these types of jobs do place locks on records. So if you receive an email that a service is not responding, then it's very possible that the reason the service is not responding is that because a lock has been placed on one of the records. And what you want to do in those cases is ask the user who is locking the record to exit out of it, and that will allow the service to continue. And we will be talking about System D in a moment, and that's where you can find out if a record is being locked. But if we go back here for the alert minutes, that is the number of minutes the system will wait before sending that email about not responding. So if a service has not responded for 15 minutes, then an alert will be sent. Once you ask the user to exit out of the locked record, the service will respond and a second email will be sent to the users entered in monitor.control, letting them know that it has resumed. And that brings us to System D. And I apologize. Let's go back to ACE for a second. Let's go look at the other service that option I recommend be selected is M3 Services. If you get a message that M3 Services is not responding, what I would suggest doing is opening up M3 Services.control and pressing this test connection button. If it's working, you should get a message letting you know what the version number is. And that means the service is not running. For customers that are hosting their own service or server, if the service is not running, you want to log into the server where QM is installed or M3 Services is installed. Open up Windows Services and make sure the service is still running, and if necessary, restart it. If you're a SaaS customer, I believe you will need to contact Zoom Assist to verify that for you. And that kind of brings us to System D, which is the system dashboard screen. And this is a screen that probably many of you are familiar with. It gives you some basic information about the system, including how many licenses you have available, how many users are currently logged in, how many available seats you have, how many phantoms you're entitled to. With regards to the backup, this is probably the screen that most users will use. And this gives you a listing of the users who are currently logged into Rover. The U box right here will be checked for the line that you are logged into. And one thing I should mention is that in service.control, when the services are started upon a reboot of QM, all services are started under the login ID of system. If I have to manually stop and restart the service, the service will get logged in under my own user ID. And I'm mentioning this because in system.d, phantoms as well as the regular users will appear in this list. And it will show a type of phantom. The type for the services started in service.control will show a type of phantom, but it doesn't tell you specifically which service is running for that user. So if you want to find that, you can open up service.control, look for the PIB number, and that will tell you, okay, the system backup is running against this line, against system PIB number 2, line number 2. So if there is a record lock that you're experiencing, in System D, we have this field here. And there, if you right mouse click on it, you will get an option to display the locks. And you can display the locks for the individual user, or you can display all locks. And this will tell you specifically what that user has locked. So in my case, I've got a PO locked, I've got a sales order locked, and I've also got monitor.control locked. And if I refresh the screen, you'll see that the number of locks has dropped to 2. So System D is where you can log off a user if their session is hung. And you do that simply by highlighting that line and pressing the log off button. Now, if there is a record lock, be careful because you only really want to use this option if their session is hung. If the user is actually logged in and you're just trying to free up a seat, ask them to exit out of their screens and then close out of Rover altogether. If you happen to log somebody off who has a record lock, they will lose their data. And if they're running a process or in the middle of saving a record, you can end up with mismatched or corrupt data. So that is really what I had planned to cover today, in terms of monitoring the backup, in terms of monitoring, setting up monitor.control. You do all of this through service.control. When you first open the screen, all your services will be showing. Again, you can limit which ones you want to see to a specific account or status. And then you can go to the properties and drill down to get to the actual screen where that service resides. If needed from service.control, you can stop a service by pressing the start button and then restart it by pressing the start button. And you can use systemd to log the users off. If you set the system up to track usage or the times users log in and out, that's what these two screens will show you right there. And then that will lead me into archiving data, which Andrew will actually be demonstrating the mechanics of. But just real briefly about archiving data. As Mohit was mentioning, when you archive data, we write the data out to a history account before we delete it from your live data account. And you can log to the history account and view that data using the same commands you would in the live account. And if a file was accidentally purged, this gives us a really easy way to recover that data without having to go to a backup. You can also specify the number of years that you want to purge based on the file. So for example, you could keep 5 years of sales data, but maybe only 2 years of the inventory transaction data. And this allows you to keep the file sizes in files like your inventory transaction file that build up data quickly at a reasonable size. And by doing this, you're helping to ensure that the system runs more efficiently and reports and processes do not take overly long to complete. And in the newer release, you can automate this process. If you're still running on one of the older releases, you can still archive data, but it's a manual step. And if anyone here wants more information on that, please let us know. And with that, I am going to turn this over to Andrew to demonstrate the archive commands.
All right, let me steal the screen. All right, let's see. Can we see my screen? We good?
Yes.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. So like Kathy said, we've had tools in the past that did this archiving, but it was pretty manual. And nobody likes to do manual things when we can automate them. So we automated it for you. I'm on our development server here. In the ACE Utilities menu, the data entry procedures, there is an archive control. And that I'm going to launch. And this is kind of where we set our defaults for what we want to archive. The process that runs and actually does the work looks at this and uses the settings that are in here. So I'm in the account DevAce. It's going to, if you don't have a history account already, it's going to put one here, and on save, it's going to create it for you. That way you don't have to do anything too manual here. And then we have this grid here that shows all the lists of different files that are available to you to archive. Just because it's in the list doesn't mean it's going to get archived. We've got these check boxes here on the right. So you can either check the top one to include them all, or if you're like, you know what, I only care about certain files, you can do, you just select the ones you want included on this archive. So you've got your file, you've got a description of what it is, and then you've got two columns here that are kind of the important important bits. So this first column is you are defining the time in months at which you want to archive data to the history count. So in this case, and in a lot of these cases, you see we have, okay, accounts payable. After 60 months, which, quick math, I think that's 5 years, that is, you're telling the system, hey, I want to move that AP record, I want to put it into the history account. And what that's kind of doing is, my analogy here is always, I remember back a few years ago, I'll say, where we had, walls of file cabinets, right? Just tons and tons of papers. And trying to find the exact one you wanted, right? You had to kind of go through the wall and kind of narrow down where you're at. By moving old data to the history account, we're essentially limiting the number of file cabinets we have to look through for data in production. So it makes your system run faster. You're querying the system, you're opening stuff, you're saving stuff. It just runs faster because there's less file cabinets to sort of sift through, right? You're moving it from one room to another in the back for kind of cold storage. And that's what we're doing here. And then the second column is delete after your specified number of months. So in this AP example we're using here, after an AP item is 60 months old or 5 years old, it's going to get moved to history, and it's just going to, be left there for historical purposes. You can log to that account and still see everything about it, see all that data, run the reports against that older data you got. But after 120 months, right, now you're saying, I don't need that anymore, delete it off the system, right? We don't need to keep, that'd be 10 years worth of data, right, in the system. Remove it, keeps things running smooth. Couple things to note: this second column, or the first column for that matter, you can put either a 0 or leave it blank. And what that's going to tell this, so like fiscal year is a good example. It's a super small file. It defines your fiscal year. There's really no reason to delete it. Like, it takes up such little space. And we're talking some financials here, so why get rid of it? Same thing with your general ledger. By default, we suggest moving that anything older than 5 years to history, and then not delete it, right? Who wants to delete your general ledger transactions, right? Pretty much no one. So we recommend keeping it. One thing you can do, you can edit these all you want, change them. There's a safety button, restore defaults, and it's going to go through and just reset all those numbers to what we recommend, right? So if you start playing with stuff, you're not liking what you're seeing, you can just reset it and be back to, the recommended settings, and then you can adjust again from there. Again, you don't have to include everything. You can include just selected files. I'm on this development server, so we haven't actually run it on this specific server, but if we did run the archive, it'll show you the last date it was run and the message. And the message usually says 24,580 records archived, 100,000 records deleted, or whatever the numbers actually are, right? So this is where you can kind of come back, check, make sure things are running because you've got the messages and the last run date, and then configure as needed. And then there is a process that goes along with it, archive P1. We generally, when we set this up, and if you have questions, if you'd like to get this set up, reach out to help at Zoomassist. We're happy to help you get this set up and configured for you. This archive P1 is that's that process, looks at these settings. We like to run this once a month. So just like you guys have your nightly service that runs, your allocations, any reports, any postings that you might run nightly, we also like to set up a monthly service. So once a month, maybe on the 1st or the 31st, whatever makes sense, we like to add archive P1 to that because we don't need to run it every night. It's kind of a lot. You're not going to generally see a whole lot of improvement from running it daily, but monthly is a nice cadence, and it just keeps things running smooth, gets that old data out. So that's the archiving. So there's just these two screens. Add this to the monthly. Like to keep it simple. Once it's added to the monthly, happens automatically. You don't have to worry about it. Your production account stays clean and performant. And you don't have to remember to do it. We don't have to remind you, hey, you've got to purge some data. You've got, 5 million sales orders in here. It's running slow, I know. It'll just automatically take care of it for you, which is preferable. And then I'm going to call a little bit of an audible. Since we're talking about system utilities, Kathy showed the services, we showed archiving. One of the newer utilities we have, which I find pretty cool, is the new report logging feature that we have. So if I scroll down, and some of you may have been on the masterclass from a few months back where I went over the new change history and how we track changes to files and all that fun stuff. This is kind of along the same lines. Inquiries in the wrong menu. And we've got this report hist.q and report log. And what we can do now is we can track outputs from reports if we want to. So we set that up in a report hist.q. I'm not going to go super deep into it, but this is just a screen that just shows all the lists of the different processes, reports, forms that we have in the system. And you can check, let's see, I think LMNOP, remembering my alphabet here real quick. I think we've got POF something. Yeah, there you go. So we're tracking changes to POF3. So anytime a user runs POF3, we're going to log it. And you can see that in this report log.q. There are different ways to search. So you can search by file name and record ID. You can search by procedure. So any procedure that's tracking enabled will show up in this list. Again, development server, so we don't have a whole ton here. But if I click POF3, and I just say, that's fine, search. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? 5. So that was run 5 times in the past month. You can see POF3 was run. That's the purchase order printing. It was run to PDF or email, the format, who did it. So that's A-Cole is me, Vern ran some. You can see the date and the time when these were run, right? So if let's launch Vern's. Let's see what this is. He's not here to defend himself. So if you click that little magnifying glass, launches a detail screen, shows you, as destinations PDF viewers from the foreground. There's one copy. It started at 11:33. It also ended at 11:33, and you can see the different settings here that was used. So in this case, he was printing PO number 1 and PO 6930. And, maybe I want to see, what happened then. So I can click view document. It's going to pop up on my other screen, of course. And now I can see that document as it was when Vern ran that routine. I say that very specifically because, as a lot of you know, some of this stuff here on the due date and quantities change, right? So if you're doing a sales order and you printed it before you shipped anything, the output on that form is going to be different than after you shipped, right? Because now it's going to show you the quantities that are shipped, quantities back ordered, right? The output changes. So that's an important note there. But you can see, that's the document that was run at that time, which is super handy if you're auditing some of this stuff. You can also see that direct by hitting this paperclip button. It's the same as clicking view document, but you can do it here. We can limit this by date. So if I only want to see what was run on the 19th, I can do that. I'm gonna click search again, and now all of Vern's are done because his was beforehand, right? And the one other way that's nice to just highlight for searching is maybe I just want to do, show me anyone who's printed PO number 6930. Click search. only that one time, and it was Vern. So you can also search and see, who printed this sales order, or who printed this sales order from this date to this date. You can kind of see who was printing what, and maybe you want to reprint that version of it, right? So that gives you the ability to do that. There we go. So this is a really new feature. If you're interested in it, reach out to help at support or help at Zoomsys, and we can talk about getting you guys an upgrade. And with that, I am done. So is this going back to Mohit or Bill?
Think either. Love it, Andrew. Thanks for getting that into the masterclass. I think people appreciate. We've gotten feedback on seeing some of the new features as soon as they come out, so appreciate that. Open it up. I'm not seeing anything in the chat at the moment, but please, if you have any questions, this is the time. We want to be sensitive to everybody's time here, but we'll try to answer as quickly as possible. I do have a couple. Just one for this would be for maybe Mohit, Andrew, or Kathy, whoever has something on top of mind. What additional steps can I take to safeguard my ERP against ransomware? Was one of the questions. So who wants to be brave? And you got that one? All right.
I don't know if I'd call it brave, but I'll take it. So if you're a SaaS customer, so if you're hosted with us, you're pretty well protected. So generally, we don't do site-to-site VPNs if we can avoid it. So you're communicating with Rover over the internet via SSH, so it's all encrypted. And what that does is it separates Rover from your network. So if you get hit with ransomware, Rover's separate, right? It doesn't matter, quote unquote, but your Rover stuff is fine. So when you recover from the ransomware, maybe you get new laptops, send people home, they can still connect to Rover. Rover's safe, right? Now, if you're on-prem, like Mohit was saying, those zip files are super important, super important. Store those offsite somewhere. We take care of that for our hosted customers. So the vault that Mohit mentioned, we take those snapshots. If we have your server on the East Coast, because that's where you are, we have a copy of that snapshot on the East Coast. We have a copy of it on the West Coast, right? So if something ever happens to one data center, it's in another. We like backups here. But if you're on-prem, those zip files, either putting them on a USB stick, taking them home at night, uploading them to a cloud storage service, right? That's the most important thing, are those zip files. We can rebuild everything else, but we need that zip file.
Okay. And the other one I had was what benefits? Yeah, are there any additional benefits to automating data archival? And yeah, that one. I mean, I think we can. Yeah, we've got some different experiences there. Why is automating data archival so important? I think we saw today how to do it, and as mentioned, you can go to help at Zoomsys if you're on Rover or one of our products to talk about how to set that up. But who wants to take that one?
Well, just real quickly, one of the benefits to archiving is that it will help to speed up the processing of reports and doing queries and lookups. And just please remember, you are archiving the data. It is not being deleted. So you can log to these history accounts and you can use the same reports that you would in your live accounts as you do in the history accounts. But again, it keeps the files at a reasonable size, and that just really helps with the processing time. And in a lot of files, like your IT file, your register files, etc., they build up data in them really quickly. And most people, I have found, just don't need more than a year or two's worth of data in those files. So keeping them, relatively small, if you will, it just helps.
Great. Yeah, so it basically affects the user experience in many ways, and that that's efficiency of your business, right? So
nice way of putting it, Bill.
Yeah, I'm putting in the simplest form my ability to understand, and just adding, human beings. We might have processes that, we're supposed to archive our data every week, or we are trusting a third-party service to do that, and human beings might forget. So just having some kind of automated process and alerts, I think could be very valuable in that sense too. So it looks like we got a question from Quentin. Andrew, I don't know if you want to kind of verbalize that, or if we're good.
Yeah.
Oh,
I answered number one. We do have a migration path. If you're on-prem and you want to move to hosted, super easy. For on the .NET client, it's really easy. We basically just take your Rover and move it, and you change this. It sounds simple, but that's all it really is. You just change which server you're looking at. If you're on the legacy client, there are some extra steps. We're still basically moving the system, but we have to set up a site-to-site VPN. So that it adds a little bit of that ransomware risk that I talked about earlier, because now the networks are connected versus being totally separate. But we can do it. It is just a lift and shift for all intents and purposes. Two, I can't really nail down a specific number. We do recommend, if you have a print server, that it would be separate from your application server or your Rover server. Kind of combining the two, it goes against best practices, I guess, to be combining stuff on the same specific server. It's better to have them separated so the load can be shared, and you're not having your print server bogging down Rover or vice versa, right? And then we have their own in-house Rover admins. Not a lot. Generally, most of our customers rely on us to help admin or administrate the server. If you're hosting it on premise, there are certain things that are kind of your responsibility, right? It's your hardware, it's your server. We can assist with things to the best of our ability, but it's not our server. Like, you control everything about it. Like, we have our users that we can log in as and help you support. But if you delete those users or change the passwords and don't tell us, well, we tried.
Understood.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like SaaS is phenomenal for a lot of reasons. It's hard to picture that I mean, I can't get over it seeming difficult. But I don't know what the next conversation would be if we were curious about that, but I would sure love to know pricing and next steps, just myself.
Okay. Quentin, we'll take a note of that, and Andrew can be part of that conversation. So we'll definitely take that down. Appreciate the question. So, okay, I think we're clear of the chat. So just going to wrap it up here. Everybody, thanks again for joining us today live, and then anybody in the future that looks at this, feel free to reach out to us with any questions. So, Mohit, Greg, Andrew, Kathy, thank you very much on behalf of everybody. Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Everyone.